Welcome to Prestige Pool Supplies Tutorials. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at a DE filter. And more importantly, we're going to be looking at how to clean that filter. Today's model is going to be a Pentair, but your model might be different. All the models are pretty much the same and based around the same concept. The only difference is the parts might be a little different. The difficulty in today's mission is about a 4 out of 10. Not too bad. Alright, let's get started. The first thing you always want to do is notate the filter pressure. If the system's already running, then notate the filter pressure then. If it's not running, then put the control panel in service mode. In this case, we have a Jandy. If you hit the far left button, the red light will flash from the auto mode to service. And then you could select the next button, which is typically the filter pump. You might verify what the label is if yours is different or in an unusual configuration. After you have notated the pressure on the filter before you clean it, go ahead and shut the system off. Change the backwash valve. In this case, we have a push-pull valve. You have to turn it 90 degrees or a quarter of a turn to let the locking pin slip out of the locking housing. From there, you can pull the valve straight up. This puts the filter in backwash mode. I always recommend running the pump for an additional 30 to 60 seconds. This allows the pump using pool water to clean some of the filter off. It's not going to do the job 100%, but it'll make your life a little easier. After you're done running the pump in backwash mode and have turned it off, I would shut off all the valves on the suction side of the pump. This allows you to quickly prime the pump when you're done cleaning the filter. The next step would be to disassemble the clamp band. Most of these filters use either 7/8 or a 15/16 socket. I always recommend using a socket. The brass nut is very sensitive and is easy to strip. I never recommend using a pair of channel locks just because the nut is brass. Once you have the clamp off, you can pull the lid. I would set the lid in the background somewhere out of your way. The grids should pull straight up. Sometimes you have to rock them back and forth to get the standpipe O-ring loosened up where it connects to the top manifold. The top manifold is made to lift the grid set out of the filter, but sometimes due to the lack of cleaning or other debris inside the filter, it becomes really heavy. If it's too heavy, I would recommend disassembling and pulling off the top manifold by itself while the grid set is still in the bottom half of the filter. You go ahead and remove the top manifold if you haven't already done so. You pull the 2 screws and just kind of wiggle it around a little bit. Once you have it apart, I flip the 9 grids upside down, and typically we'll try to find a fence or something to lean them to. If you flip them upside down as you're rinsing them out, the water doesn't collect in the grid itself. It'll run out the hole on the bottom. A good water jet nozzle and some good pressure is the best thing. At this point, I just start working the grid, washing from the top to the bottom. As you do, the dirt on the inside and on the outside will wash to the bottom and wash off. It's pretty easy, a little messy, but ultimately the job is just to clean them off. You will not be able to get it to look brand new. They will still have the grids will still look a little stained. Ultimately, we're just trying to get the debris off of them. The good thing about DE is it kills fire ants, so running a lot of water over the DE will dilute the DE until it's pretty much gone. And then I always tell my customers it kills fire ants because it scratches their throats when they eat it. After you clean the grids, you need to inspect the grids. I check all the corners, the seams, make sure the plastic piece where that hooks up to the manifold isn't cracked or broken. There's several ribs inside the grid that you can check as well. Ultimately, we're trying to make sure that there are no holes or tears in the grid itself and that the skeleton or plastic membrane inside isn't broken. The next step would be to find the lower manifold assembly. Typically, especially on a Pentair F&S Plus filter, the partial grid, which is the short one, there's only one short one, is marked. It's either marked start here or partial or small grid. You would at this point take the small grid and place it in that particular partition and then start building it around. As you go, you just kind of, just keep building it all the way around. Put the knuckle in the round spot at the bottom of the manifold, and they'll just kind of fit into place. You might have to jiggle it around a bit, but ultimately you're just going to work your way in a circle back to the partial that you started. Once you have all the grids in place, line up the 2 through rods into the upper manifold. You'll notice that the standpipe goes in the notch that was left out where the partial grid is. That's why that particular grid is a partial, is because you don't want it to go, it's got to stop short so that the standpipe has its room. As you're putting it together, you might have to wiggle the manifold back and forth to get all the grids in place. The trick is not to force it. Once you've done that, thread your nuts back on. I typically only hand tighten these nuts. I never use a wrench, only because, again, the manifold is really easy to break. After I get it back together, I give it a quick rinse down just for any of my dirt and debris off my hands. At this point, I'd clean out the lower tank. You can remove the lower plug and then just take your water hose and rinse out the leftover DE and get the tank completely clean. I would also clean out or wash off the O-ring. You can get your entire project all back together and have little tiny leaks around the 2 halves where they mate together, all because of a little bit of dirt or DE that's on the O-ring. Likely, depending on how much lube is already on there, you might need to use some magic lube in sparing amounts. Too much magic lube will actually cause you some more problems, but just enough will lube the O-rings and make the 2 halves and the standpipe go back together. Carefully put the assembled manifold and grid set back in the tank. As you're installing the grid set back in the lower tank, you need to line up the standpipe into the upper manifold. Be careful not to rest the weight of the grid set on the standpipe alone. Again, back to breaking the manifold. As you get the standpipe inside the manifold, you can wiggle it back and forth and it will slide into place. At this point, we're ready to put the upper half of the tank lid back together. Make sure when you set the upper half you clock it. Another thing, when you get done and you realize the pressure gauge is facing the brick wall, you'll have to take your band clamp back off and reassemble. So it's always a good point to make sure the pressure gauge is in a position that you can see the pressure gauge from the control panel. At this point, we want to reinstall the band clamp. Again, kind of like the clocking of the pressure gauge, you also want to make the band clamp come together in an area that's not too tight or constricted. I always recommend using a rubber mallet and tap the band clamp around the edges. If you'll do this as you're tightening it, you can tighten most of it out with just hand type. At the end, I put a socket driver on there and use a drill just to get the last bit. Make sure you don't have the drill clutch set too high, or you could strip out that brass nut. At this point, we're ready to reinstall the drain cap on the tank. After you've put the plug in the bottom of the filter, you need to open the valves back up so that once you turn the pump on, it has a water supply. This should eliminate some of the priming time for the pump to get going again. So at this point, I would fill the pump back up with a water hose, fill it until it won't hold any more water. Once you have the lid back on the pump, then you can open up the valves that you shut off at the end of the backwash. This will allow the plumbing and manifold to be completely full of water. In fact, I have found it works better and easier if you only open one valve at a time to prime. My service technician chose to do all 3 of them, but sometimes if you have a stubborn pump, just open one valve and let it prime through one. Next, make sure you close the backwash line, slide the push-pull valve back down, and rotate it back 90 degrees to lock the locking pin. At this point, reach over to your panel or power switch and turn the pump on. As the pump builds its prime, it's going to put air pressure into the tank that you can bleed off with the air pressure relief valve. After the pump gets good and primed, you can go ahead and open the second, third, and fourth, or however many suction valves that you had. At this point, we want to check and make sure that we don't have any leaks around the two mating surfaces of the two halves. Also look for leaks at the drain plug and the air relief valve. At this point, we've got the filter running at its full capacity, sucking from all three, in this case, all three suction lines. If you will look at the sticker or the manufacturer's label on the side of the filter or at your bag of DE, there's a quick reference to notate how much DE to put into a filter that has just been cleaned. In this case, the DE manufacturer and Pentair recommend 12 quarts of DE. I always recommend using a quart scoop, and it's always best to put the DE in the skimmer that is closest to the filter. Sometimes the DE will clot up. It will eventually dissolve, but you can speed it up by pouring some water on top. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed our segment on cleaning your FNS Plus Pentair filter. We are always available if you need any help. Please give us a call for any questions. Have a great day and get to cleaning that filter.